Good evening, church family. And to all of our guests, we're so glad to have you with us. We have been looking forward to this for some time, been planning for it, praying about it. Tonight is finally here. Our speaker is Dr. Jeff Miller. He holds multiple degrees in the physical sciences, but I'm just going to skip that to get down to this. He currently serves as a full-time science writer for Apologetics Press, the associate editor of the monthly Christian Evidences Journal, Reason and Revelation, and the editor of the Apologetics Press Bible class curriculum. He also serves as the instructor of the Bear Valley Institute teaching Christian Evidences, and Dr. Miller is the author of several books, including Science versus Evolution, Flooded, In the Way He Should Go, and I like this one, Dating Without Detonating. He's married to Julie and has 5 children. Let's pray together. Father, thank you for bringing Dr. Miller here, Father, for this 3 days of him opening up our minds and our hearts to the science and to the Bible and how they relate, and bringing us the truth about our God and about Jesus and about having them in our lives. Bless him as he teaches us, is our prayer in Christ's name. Amen. Dr. Jeff Miller.
I am excited to be here. I think I've only been in Myrtle Beach one time, a few years ago at a creation conference I was attending. I probably attended here if we happened to have been here on a Wednesday or Sunday, I'm sure. The most notable thing that happened on that trip was one of my little ones accidentally hit another one of my little ones in the head with a golf club. So that'll forever be in my mind as something that happened. You got to watch out. So we got to watch behind you when you swing one of those things, right? Appreciate you being here tonight, and hope that the material I'll be presenting will be useful to you from an evangelistic standpoint, especially the kind of things that I'll be covering. There's a lot of material, and if you got one of those, I think a bunch of those booklets were printed off that I have for you to be able to follow along and fill in the blanks as we go. And so that you can kind of keep the flow of what we're doing this weekend. Now, we spend a lot of time in the church, and where I work at Apologetics Press, which I'll tell you some about over the weekend, but we spend a lot of time countering evolutionary theory because that is the dominant other perspective that is pushing against the Bible and what the Bible teaches about creation. And so we have to do that. We have to push back and deal with that subject. It is, statistically, we see that it is eroding faith in the Bible in a widespread way in the church and in the country at large. There is a mass exodus going on from the church over that single issue, the statistics are showing. And so we as Christians, we examine the evidence and we spend time countering evolutionary theory. But what about our model? What about our side of the aisle, so to speak? So the evolutionary community, turns around and points the finger at us and says, you guys are spending all this time trying to poke holes in our model. Where's your model? I mean, we at least have a scientific model. That's better than what you guys have. We at least have a framework that we can use to do science and make sense of the physical evidence around us. Creation can't even claim to be scientific without having a legitimate model. So, for example, back in 2007, Michael Shermer, who's a famous skeptic, our Kyle Budd at Apologetics Press, debated him this last fall. And he wrote a book where he tried to make the case against intelligent design in creation and make the case for evolution. He's a very influential writer, influencing the minds of the scientific community and the young people of our country through his very popular books and so forth. Here's one of the things that he said in that book. For creationists to disprove evolution, they need to unravel all these independent lines of evidence that he talks about in his book, as well as construct a rival theory that can explain them, the evidences, better than the theory of evolution. They have yet to do so, he said. He said, intelligent design creationists have no science to speak of. If creationists want their doctrines taught in public school science classes, they need first to develop a science and then to convince scientists that their scientific ideas merit inclusion based on the quality of the arguments and the evidence. A famous philosopher from the 1800s, Herbert Spencer, said, those who cavalierly reject the theory of evolution as not adequately supported by facts seem quite to forget that their own theory is supported by no facts at all. Right? So this is the perspective. This is the argument that is being used against biblical creation out there. So whenever you only hear one side of the story, it's easy to believe that side. Proverbs 18:17 warns you about that. But it's amazing how often we can change our position when we hear the other side of the story. Now notice again the second half of his challenge. Okay, we need a rival theory that can explain the evidence better than evolution, and according to him, we haven't done that. All right, so this is a real argument that they're using against creation. So notice then that defeating error is good, but it doesn't teach the truth. Okay, it leaves an empty vacuum that has to be filled with something. So how do we know that our model is right, creation? Does the scientific evidence actually support it, or do we have a blind faith in creation? So do we have a model that can make sense of the physical evidence around us in the world in this very heavily scientific age? All right, so this is a crucial question that young people especially need answers to. They're not getting those answers, and so they're leaving the church. 4 out of 10 of our young people are leaving the church, according to the statistics. The law of rationality in philosophy says one should only draw those conclusions that are warranted by the evidence. Right? And this is a biblical idea. 1 Thessalonians 5:21. Test all things, hold fast what is good, or the NAS rendering. Examine everything carefully, hold fast to that which is good. In other words, don't just believe anything you hear. Examine it. Test it. Look at the evidence and see if it actually substantiates something before you come to believe in it. This is important to God, and so it should be important to us. God doesn't want us to just blindly believe that He exists, that the Bible really is His Word. He expects us to weigh the evidence and come to the logical, reasonable conclusion from that evidence, to actually know the truth that'll set you free, John 8:32. This isn't something that you just have to blindly accept. You can know it. He expects you to know it. So biblical faith in God is not blind. It's not this blind leap into the dark, hoping there's somebody out there that's going to catch you. Now that concept would be what we call fideism. According to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, this is reliance on faith, they mean blind faith, rather than reason. Right? So evidence-based conclusions in pursuit of religious truth. All right? So notice that modern dictionaries put faith against, in contrast to, reasoning and evidence, because that's what the bulk of the religious world out there has come to believe about biblical faith. That's what they think that this is talking about. So biblical faith or belief is based on evidence. It is like the faith or trust that you have in a parent or a friend that have proven themselves based on the evidence to be trustworthy. That's where our faith and trust comes from. And the same concept is what applies to the Bible. And so that is why God expects us to have faith. This isn't a blind thing. Notice, for example, what Romans 1:20 says. Since the creation of the world, God's invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by creation, the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. All right, so in other words, you can look at the things that are made, and they force you to conclude there's a God, and you can even learn some things about that God, and the evidence is so pervasive in the created order that if you don't decide that there is a God, it's on you. You're not going to be able to stand on Judgment Day and say, God, it's not my fault, you didn't give me enough proof. You're not going to be able to do that. You will be without excuse, because if you logically follow the evidence, it demands that there has to be a God. And he specifically is talking about the evidence in the created order. We're talking about doing science. When we engage in science, it forces us to conclude that there is a God. We have to be ready to fill the void that we leave when we deal with evolution and fill that void with a model that can be shown to fit with the evidence. Fill in that void with the true model of origins. Notice, before other models fill in that gap, right? Because there's other models out there, right? We got to fill in the model with the true model, the biblical model. So not only, again, is refuting error, we got to do that, but we also have to teach the truth to fill that void. And that is what the goal of this seminar this weekend is all about. We're going to systematically make the case for biblical creation by examining a lot of evidence. So if a person is going to try to do that, if you want to build the biblical creation model based on the evidence, rather than just having blind faith, the first thing you have to do, of course, is show that there really is evidence that demands that there is a God. And then you're going to have to specifically show that that God is the God of the Bible, as opposed to the million gods of Hinduism or Buddha or Allah, all these other gods. How do you know that it's the God of the Bible? And then you have to show that the Bible specifically is inspired. It actually came from God. We've got to have the evidence to substantiate that. And then you can examine the Bible and figure out, okay, what does the Bible claim with regard to our history? The origin of the universe, the scientific history of the universe, especially as it relates to major events that could shape how we perceive the world around us and the evidence. Okay, we got to understand the history of the earth. And then you can examine this model and see if it is in fact, it fits with the evidence. This is a valid model. You can actually do scientific experimentation and so forth using what the Bible would force you to predict, and therefore help to validate your scientific model. And then you can show that it is a robust model. That is, it can withstand scientific scrutiny and criticism. And so this is what we're going to do this weekend in a systematic way. So concerning our first item in that tower, plank number 1. So does God exist? Does the evidence demand that? I'm sure you've probably studied this. It's going to be a very brief summary of this topic tonight. So in studying the evidence over the millennia, humans have logically reasoned from the available evidence and articulated with words many excellent philosophical arguments that demand that there has to be a God. And these arguments have stood the test of time and not been refuted, right? Even though people have tried to chip away at these arguments, they've stood the test of time for hundreds of years. Blair Scott of American Atheists said concerning these classical arguments, scoffingly, he said, the theological arguments have not changed much over thousands of years. And so he meant this as a scoff. This is just antiquated stuff you guys are throwing out here in the debates and so forth. Well, really, he's complimenting us because truth doesn't have to change. It shouldn't change. If it is the truth, it should just gather more and more evidence that helps to substantiate the points that are being made. And in fact, Fred Hoyle, this is the guy that actually coined the term Big Bang, famous British cosmologist and evolutionist. He said, you should be suspicious of a theory if more and more hypotheses are needed to support it. Now, it's truly ironic that that statement perfectly describes evolutionary theories, like the Big Bang and Darwin's general theory of evolution. They have to constantly be adjusted and even overhauled in many cases. The Big Bang, as it stands today, is nothing like what it was when it was originally developed. Darwinian evolution has completely changed over the last 150 years. They've been overhauled, these other models. You should be suspicious of a theory if you keep having, okay, so that doesn't fit the evidence, but maybe this will. Or maybe this will. You should be suspicious of a theory if you have to keep doing that. Okay, now we haven't had to do that with the creation model. It's based on these evidences that have stood the test of time. So, for example, the moral argument. Okay, humans intuitively know that there is right and there is wrong. And we call that objective moral value. In other words, right and wrong that aren't based on your opinion and my opinion. It is somehow above us. It's this standard that is above humans where we can't define this. This is not opinion based. In other words, it is not what we call subjective moral value. That's where we're making it up. It is objective. It is above us. Now, if it is true that there is a system of objective morality that is above humanity, then it could not have been made by humanity. And by implication, there has to be a moral being above humanity that created morality. And so this is basically the moral argument for the existence of God. It's been around for a long time. Nobody's been able to refute it. But if atheism is true, then there is no such thing as right and wrong. There is no objective right and wrong for everybody. Richard Dawkins, in his book, The God Delusion, he said, absolutist moral discrimination is devastatingly undermined by the fact of evolution, right? So he calls evolution a fact. But the point he's making is, if evolution is true, there is no absolute moral law. Okay, it's just your opinion and my opinion. We're just animals, and somewhere along the way, with what we think is right and wrong was just kind of made up. So if evolution were true, then there is no such thing as absolute morality. In February 1998, William Provine, professor of evolutionary biology at Cornell, he laid out several of the undeniable implications of atheism in a speech. And look at number 3 there. According to the naturalistic, the evolutionary perspective, there is no ultimate foundation for ethics. And notice also that he says that Charles Darwin understood that whenever he developed evolutionary theory. Here's what Charles Darwin said in his autobiography. A man who has no assured and ever-present belief in the existence of a personal God or of a future existence with retribution and reward can have for his rule of life, as far as I can see, only to follow those impulses and instincts which are the strongest or which seem to him the best ones. So according to Darwin, pure naturalism, atheism, naturalistic evolution would imply that there is no set moral standard for everybody. There's no right and wrong. There's just opinion and impulses. You might have one person that's stronger than another one that can push his system of morality on you, but that doesn't make it actually right. There is no right. French existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre said, everything is indeed permitted if God does not exist. So if there is no God, there's no higher being that can give absolute law that everyone is subject to. There's just opinions, all right, if that's all there is. Now, the problem, one of the reasons why the moral argument has stood the test of time is because nobody can really stick to the idea that there is no objective standard. Even the leading atheists themselves can't help but use terminology that imply it. Okay, so notice, for example, Dan Barker is a pretty notorious atheist and debater. He wrote the book Godless, where Richard Dawkins wrote the foreword for him. He's the co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Kyle Budd at Apologetics Press, he debated him in 2009. And during the Q&A portion, he asked Barker this question. If it would be acceptable to Barker to rape a girl, if it was going to save humanity from some, say, alien race, it's going to come kill everybody off, and watch him stumble over himself as he tries to stay consistent with his position in the face of real evil. It would be horrible. It'd be regrettable. I'd hate myself. I'd probably kill myself after doing it, and I'd say, why? That doesn't make any sense if there's no morality. Your gut is telling you something. But I would have the courage, if that was the only option. If that were the only option, then I would go through with it. I would pity that woman. I'd pity myself. But morality would require me to take the course of action that results in the least amount of harm? Why would morality force you to do that? And those of you whose lives that I save by doing that, you might be disgusted at what I did, but you'd be alive rather than dead. So in that weird situation, which is hypothetical and extreme, would never happen, there are cases where what we think are right and wrong could be flipped around. Okay, so what is right and wrong when you flip it around? Okay, what he's saying is he still believes there's right and wrong. It's just flipped. Okay, so Kyle proceeds to ask him, okay, would you rape 2 women? What about 2,000? Would it be okay to rape 2 million to save the human race? And Barker said, to save 6 billion? Yes. Yes, it would be, because otherwise you get 6 billion deaths. Are you telling me we should not do what is morally necessary to do to minimize harm? So notice they can't help but talk about morality as though everybody should be doing this and we all know it. Okay? But there can be nothing that is morally necessary if there is no moral law higher than man. All right, this is simple. This concept is simple, all right? It doesn't matter what culture you're in, okay? It doesn't matter how old you are, even from a young age. Even if we haven't been taught about right and wrong, we still know there's right and wrong. You know, we know it wouldn't be right or fair if another person came and took something from me that wasn't his, that he hadn't worked for, or that I hadn't given it to him, right? We don't even have to learn that. Don't kids know that from a young age? That's not fair, they say, right? We know, even if we're 3 years old, if I steal a cookie and my brother steals a cookie and I get in trouble and he doesn't, we know that's not right. That's not fair. It's not just. We all get that. It's not fair if I work my whole life for something. Someone comes and beats me up and takes it. Okay, even if it's the government, we understand that's not right. That's not fair. They take it and they give it to somebody that hasn't done that work. So mankind gets this concept. We understand if we do a bunch of work writing a paper and somebody comes and plagiarizes our work, doesn't give us any credit, that's not right. Now we may accept it, all right? Yeah, okay, that's just the way of the world, and we may move on. But the point is, we all know it's unfair. It's wrong. It's not an opinion to say that. Injustice, we know, is objectively wrong. We understand within us that there's a higher law that governs everybody about fairness and justice, that is above humans and it is not subject to our opinions. How can we know about fairness? Where does that come from, that concept? There can't be this higher fairness code that is above humanity without there being a lawmaker that wrote that law code that's also above us. So objective morality illustrates there has to be a God. And that is the moral argument. Now, concerning the fact that we intuitively understand fairness and justice, we have a built-in program that governs human behavior. It's interesting to note the fact that in the Bible, the English words righteous and just can be translated interchangeably from their underlying words. So in Hebrew, it's tzaddik, and it can be translated both righteous or just. You can interchange those words. In Greek, it's dikaios, again, righteous or just. Now, the implication seems to be that what is right comes down to what is just, what's fair. So the fact that we've been programmed with a fairness meter means that we have a program that can be used to determine what is objectively right and wrong, which means there is right and wrong that humans don't make up. It's programmed into us, not developed by us. Now, the minute a person acknowledges that there are things that are unfair, no matter who it is, he's admitting to the existence of objective moral value and therefore a higher being that had to create that law. He's rejecting atheism and acknowledging there has to be a God. Here's another one of the arguments that we've had around for a long time, the intuitional argument. This is the idea that humans are incurably religious. Our intuition tells us there's got to be a God out there. This seems to be so common to humanity as though we've been programmed with it. According to adherents.com, 92% of the world believes that there's something beyond the purely physical. 86% are involved in worshiping something, and I would say the rest are basically worshiping themselves and each other. This isn't something the animals do, but humans seem to have been built with this desire to go and worship something. And atheism can't explain this apparently instinctive tendency of humanity. It doesn't make sense from an atheistic perspective. Michael Shermer admitted, we perceive nature to be intelligently designed. He came out and admitted it. A designer. Since the most common reason people give for why they believe in God is the good design in the world, Intelligent design creationists are tapping into the intuitive understanding most people hold about life and the universe. Richard Dawkins said, it's almost as if the human brain were specifically designed to find Darwinism hard to believe. Can you see them ripping their hair out over this? I mean, why is it intuitive to be a theist? He says, why, if it is false, does every culture in the world have religion? True or false, religion is ubiquitous, so where does it come from? How do you explain this? Psychologists Paul Bloom and Dina Weisberg of Yale University and University of Pennsylvania, they acknowledge there is by now a large body of research suggesting that humans are natural-born creationists. When we see non-random structure and design, we assume that it was created by an intelligent being. It seems to be built into us. The studies are supporting this. What do you have to do to get them to not think that anymore? You have to try to teach it out of them, which is what's going on in the world around us. Geneticist Dean Hamer even wrote a book called The God Gene, where he acknowledged that humans seem to be hardwired to be religious, and he's trying to just hypothesize some way to explain this in a physical way. And so he's like, maybe there's genes. Maybe you have genes that kind of are forcing you to be religious or something. There's no evidence of that. But there needs to be if there's nothing beyond the pure physical. The religious inclination of humanity is an acknowledged problem for atheists. Why? Why would this be a problem? Notice what Richard Dawkins said. Because religion is so wasteful. It's so extravagant. And Darwinian selection habitually targets and eliminates waste. So it doesn't make sense that this would have stuck around if evolution is true. Famous atheistic philosopher Daniel Dennett expounds on this problem of costly religion. So the world is populated by billions of people, he says, almost all of whom devote a significant fraction of their time and energy to some sort of religious activity. Rituals such as daily prayer, both public and private, or frequent attendance at ceremonies, but also costly sacrifices, not working on certain days, no matter what looming crisis needs prompt attention, and abiding by a host of strenuously observed prohibitions and requirements. So if evolution were true, then why wasn't religion eliminated? Why weren't the humans wiped out? Humans engage in this costly endeavor that should have worked against us if evolution is true, and it should have caused the demise of our species. And it's ubiquitous. It's not like this is just some weird exception here and there. This is something humans do en masse, and it didn't wipe us out. That's a problem. So evolutionists are going to great lengths to try to explain this from an evolutionary perspective. Dawkins hypothesized, maybe belief in having faith is like a virus, and it's infected humanity, and we're spreading it around, and so forth. Okay, there's major problems with that if you immediately think through that. So first of all, why didn't it wipe us out if this is a problem? But also, if it's a virus, why wouldn't you say the same thing about naturalism and atheistic thinking? It's spreading like a virus too. It works just as well both ways. And the bottom line is there's no evidence that this is some kind of virus. What we see is it should have wiped out humans, but humans have always been religious. So notice what Acts 17 says. He, God, has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on the face of the earth. He made them in such a way that they should seek the Lord. He made us in a way where we would tend to seek Him, in the hope that they might grope for Him and find Him. How are they going to find Him? He's not far from each one of us. For in Him we live and move and have our being. So God put within us this instinct to want to grope for Him, and He made sure that you can find Him if you're willing to do that. That's why it's without excuse if you don't find Him. It means you're not really looking. That's the problem here with atheism. Human intuition indicates God exists. How about the aesthetic argument? This is the fact that beauty exists, and we seem to have been given this capability of appreciating it. Now again, atheism can't adequately explain beauty because the appreciation of beauty, by and large, has no evolutionary advantage. which highlights the fact that there must be a God who cares for his creation and wanted to give us joy and pleasure, and that's why he built this into us. Now, Darwin recognized that this argument was a threat to evolution. In The Origin of Species, here's what he said. Some authors believe that many structures have been created for the sake of beauty, to delight man of the Creator, or for the sake of mere variety. Such doctrines, if true, would be absolutely fatal to my theory. Why? Well, because evolution can't explain how something would become beautiful for the sole benefit of others. Because evolution is all about the survival of the fittest. It is selfishness. It is the selfish battle of the strong for survival. It's not about other people, not other creatures. So evolving a trait has to have a selfish benefit, not the benefit of others. So what he hypothesized was, maybe beauty wasn't created, it just accidentally evolved, and it stuck around, for example, in the beautiful male birds, because that beauty benefited those creatures personally in getting mates, what we call sexual selection. And then the ugly animals that didn't get, well, they wouldn't get those mates, and so they tend to die out. See any problems with that? I mean, first of all, you see a lot of ugly animals out there? This doesn't seem to work. But also, this doesn't explain all examples of beauty by any means. Okay? No, so also, but notice, number one, Darwin's natural selection. That's what Darwin came up with, the idea of natural selection, which is not even a problem from a creationist perspective. But it only helps explain the survival of the fittest, not the arrival of the fittest in the first place. He had no mechanism for how you get a new creature on the planet. It was just a filtering mechanism for how to eliminate the ones that aren't the best for an environment. It's not a problem from a creationist perspective at all. So evolution has no answer for how those creatures could have become beautiful in the first place. The accidental creation of beauty that would then be appealing to mates. There is no known evolutionary mechanism to generate new genetic information in the genome. You got to have new information to get a new creature, and there is no known natural mechanism to do that. Nobody's come up with anything. Mutations, we see from actual empirical observation of the evidence, mutations aren't doing that. They don't do that. But new information would be needed to create beauty where there once was no beauty. But also, number two, notice, natural selection doesn't explain why we have an appreciation of beauty in the first place. Why do you get joy and pleasure and happiness from merely hearing beautiful music, or from an orchestra, or from seeing a waterfall, or seeing the sunset at the beach, So natural selection might explain why something beautiful tends to stick around, but it doesn't explain why you see that thing as beautiful in the first place. Okay? Why do you have that appreciation of beauty? And therein lies the argument for the existence of a loving God. He has made everything beautiful in its time, Ecclesiastes 3:11. Things that are pleasant to the eyes, Ecclesiastes 11 and verse 7. How about the ontological argument? This is a complicated argument to understand, so we don't usually use this as one of our big arguments. And there's variations of this argument that you could really go down a rabbit hole studying. But the general idea is that you can't conceive of a quality or a characteristic that doesn't exist in some being. Okay, so for example, when you make up something that you've never seen, you make up some new creature in your mind, it's still composed of attributes that you know exist. So try to make up a creature, okay, whatever. Four-headed dragon, it's got snakes for legs, and there's fire coming out of his eye sockets, or whatever you come up with. It's composed, for example, of things that you know exist, like in this case, heads, snakes, fire, eyes. You can't come up with anything totally new that's not already comprised of base qualities that you know exist. So the Star Trek and Star Wars characters, they're all, as cool and different as they look, they're still all made up of characteristics you know exist. So the ontological argument says you can't conceive of something, any qualities that you don't already know exist in some being. And yet you can conceive of superlative characteristics like omniscience omnipotence, omnipresence, omnibenevolence, and so forth, indicating that they must exist in some being. Now, okay, we could go deeper into this concept. Is this just an imaginary being with these imaginary characteristics? Okay, so you can think through that. If a characteristic were just imagined, you just made it up, then it wouldn't be the greatest. It wouldn't be superlative, because there would be something even greater than an imagined characteristic. Well, what could be greater? Well, if that characteristic were actually real, not just imagined, it would be greater. A real characteristic is superlative over an imagined one. And yet we can conceive of real superlative characteristics, proving that those characteristics must exist in some being. And that is the thrust of the ontological argument. How about the cosmological argument? This one's one of my favorites. So the cosmos, the universe, exists. It is an effect. It demands a cause. It had to come from somewhere. Remember in Job chapter 38, God lays out the basic thrust of this argument. He asked Job about the creation of the earth and the universe. Where did it come from? Okay, why did it have to come from anywhere? Well, it's implied by the evidence. Who created it? Who laid the foundation of the earth, he said? Who determined its measurements and stretched the line upon it? Who laid its cornerstone? So the universe exists. It demands a cause. Why would we say that? Well, because the evidence indicates anytime you have an effect, there has to be a cause, a reason for that effect. And this is fundamental to science. This is what science is all about. Science is all about determining the effects of various causes and the causes of various effects. So if you want to be rational and accept the evidence, well, the evidence says that the law of cause and effect applies in every instance we've ever seen in the universe. It always applies. Anything physical we've ever witnessed, it is always applying there. In paraphrasing, it says basically that if there's an effect, there must logically be a cause. Now, more precisely, every material, every physical effect we've ever seen always has an adequate antecedent or simultaneous cause. So the cause has to either precede or come at the same time as its effect, and it has to be adequate. It has to have the necessary power, the necessary potential to actually bring about the effect. So all natural effects must have causes based on all the evidence. All right, well, if an effect always has a cause, then what is the ultimate cause of all the physical stuff in the universe? Okay, we've got planets. They exist. They're moving through space. They're spinning. These are effects. You have life, living things. They demand an adequate cause. Something has to cause these things to happen, and yet the naturalist has no explanation for this. Whenever you push the evolutionary community on these important questions, they don't have an answer. They'll say, well, how do you get life from non-life? Well, we don't know. We haven't done it in a lab. But maybe it was from some pool of ooze and lightning struck it. And so they go into the laboratory, try to do that, and it makes tar, the Miller-Urey experiment. Maybe it was aliens that brought it. Where'd the aliens come from? Well, we don't know about that. But if the Big Bang is true, then there's got to be aliens. And the Big Bang is true, so they're out there somewhere. Okay, well, is the Big Bang true? Well, if the Big Bang's true, then it just keeps going back and back. They don't have an explanation for the most basic of questions. You've got to have an ultimate cause for all of this. The mere existence of the cosmos is proof of the existence of a supernatural being, something outside of nature. So how are they trying to deal with this conundrum? What cause can the atheist point to try to explain the existence of the universe without a God? The dominant belief, of course, today is the Big Bang Theory. Everything in the universe was originally crammed into this tiny, extremely hot, dense ball billions of years ago. Now, even if that were true, of course, we ask, hey, wait a minute, what caused that, right? Where did that little ball come from? Now logically, okay, we want to be logical here. If you're a naturalist, then you don't accept a God. Okay, so you got to wipe that option off the table. That leaves you with two possibilities. That's all you got. Either it created itself. This is called spontaneous generation. You give it a fancy name that nobody understands what it means, and it sounds like, oh, well, that could be it. That's all it means. Matter and energy created itself. That's one option you have. Or it's existed forever. So it didn't have to be created. It didn't have to create itself because it's always been here. It's eternal. All right, so let's just look at the evidence and consider the first option. Could the stuff of the universe come from nothing on its own, just create itself? Now, if you're a naturalist and you don't accept that there's a God, then here's what you got. Let's say that there's an invisible box around the whole universe. Okay, big box. And this is a boundary layer for the universe, and it's big enough to hold the whole universe in it. So say the blast radius of the Big Bang, so to speak. Okay, so it's all inside of this box. Now, if you believe that the universe could just spontaneously generate, pop into existence, then in a thermodynamic sense, you believe that this box was initially completely empty. Okay, so let's zoom inside of the box. So we're around inside of this box, and this model, which is, by the way, the dominant belief of the scientific community around us. This idea is you can stand around inside of this box and stare into nothingness. And if you just give it enough time, all of a sudden, pop, something will just appear. Sounds kind of like magic, right? And not only could something pop into existence, but according to this model, a little ball containing all of the stuff of the universe for some reason pops into existence, and then for some reason, the Big Bang process starts with inflation, where everything is expanding. The whole universe is expanding faster than the speed of light. How does that happen? Oh, we don't know. Why did it start? We don't know. Why did it stop? We don't know. But it had to happen in order to explain all these other problems. And eventually, given enough time, somehow life pops into existence, gradually evolves over time, and then, ta-da, you show up. This is the dominant belief today. It is a modern, respectable form of superstitious witchcraft without a witch. That is what the scientific community has accepted hook, line, and sinker, in spite of the fact that this is pagan, superstitious thinking, and it's somehow packaged in a way that makes everybody feel like we got to accept this. But it's superstitious mumbo jumbo. Here's what this is the actual evidence. Okay, the first law, the laws of thermodynamics are sometimes considered super laws in size. These are laws that the other laws are based on. These are the ultimate laws that govern the universe. And the first law of thermodynamics says, this is according to an evolutionist, Willard Young, and he's accurate about this, energy, based on our observations of the universe, energy can be neither created nor destroyed, but can only be converted from one form to another. We also call this the law of conservation of matter and energy. Now, what does this mean practically speaking? Well, have you ever noticed what happened to a log of wood when you burned it? Where did all the stuff go? I mean, all you got is this pile of ash. So where did everything else go? Did it disappear from the universe? Was it destroyed, in other words? Well, the first law of thermodynamics says that in any process we've ever seen, like wood burning, matter and energy can change into other types of energy. Like while it's burning, it might turn into heat and light and ash. But the sum total amount of energy in the universe that was present before you did that process is the same as the energy that was there after you did the process. Energy hasn't disappeared or been destroyed from the universe by burning that wood, and energy hasn't popped into existence in that process either. Now, using more technical terminology, the first law of thermodynamics says that in any system, whether it be closed or open, you just have to keep track of where your boundary is. But in our case, a closed system is what we're looking at. So this is like our box that contains the universe, so there's no energy coming into the system from outside of nature, right? Because they don't accept supernature. And there's no energy leaving the system because we've defined the boundary as so big that it's holding the entire universe in there. So nobody's opening this box and putting anything in there or taking it out. The sum total amount of energy within the boundaries of that system must remain constant. So as this chart shows, the amount of energy present before any process we've ever seen in the universe has to equal before and after. So if you start with nothing in the box before any process, in order to equalize the equation, how much energy do you have to have after? Zero, nothing. All right, so if you start with nothing in the universe before the appearance of the cosmic egg, then there should be no energy after the cosmic egg either. So nothing pops into existence. And keep in mind, there's no exceptions to this. According to the first law of thermodynamics, This can't happen. It would be unscientific. It would go against the laws of science to believe that matter and energy could come into being in such a way that the first law of thermodynamics was violated. If you believe that, you're no longer a naturalist. You don't believe in natural law. You don't believe that that is the only way to explain everything. You're not a naturalist anymore. You now believe in something that violates the laws of nature. You're a supernaturalist just like me. Now, you may not like my particular version of supernaturalism, but I can support mine with evidence. What do you got? According to the first law, the only way you can get matter to appear in that box is if there's something outside of the box that put it there. That's what science tells you. That's why you can look at the things that are made and come to the conclusion there's a God, and if you don't, you're without excuse. You must have something biasing you that's keeping you from accepting the truth. That's the real problem. According to the scientific evidence, the first option is not possible. Now, you can believe it if you want, but you just need to understand you're being irrational and unscientific if you believe that. What about the second option? Now, hardly anybody accepts this anymore. This was more popular several decades ago, but it's got major problems that cause everybody to back off of this idea. Could the universe be eternal, the stuff of the universe? This would claim that the universe has always been around inside of that box. No one put it there. It didn't pop into existence. It's just always been there. So it's either been moving through space forever, the universe expanding, or if you believe in the oscillating universe model, you believe the universe operates in a cycle where you have a collapse with a big bang and then it expands, and then it collapses and you get a big bang expansion. It's like a big cosmic accordion going on forever, right? So either way, this model would say the stuff of the universe is eternal. It's always been here. Now notice what well-known atheist, physicist, cosmologist, astrobiologist of Arizona State University, Paul Davies, writing in New Scientist, here's what he said about the second law of thermodynamics. It says, roughly speaking, that in any change, the universe becomes a slightly more disorderly place. The entropy goes up. The information content goes down. This natural tendency towards disintegration and chaos is evident all around us. Okay, so what is the implication of that statement? Well, in a technical sense, the second law of thermodynamics builds on the first. Okay, so it says, okay, according to the first law, in any change we've ever seen, okay, you have the same amount of energy present before and after a process, but in the process, along the way, some of that energy becomes less usable. That's what the second law says. And we call this entropy. And this is an irreversible process, which, by the way, causes a lot of problems too. Why does it only go in one direction? Right? Why is everything getting less usable? It's decaying, right? Why is that happening? So any process we've ever seen, this is what we see happening. And what this means, practically speaking, is that everything in the universe is wearing out. It's decaying. And as Paul Davies said, we can see this idea everywhere. I mean, you can't really argue with this. Wouldn't it be nice if a car got nicer over time? Right? You go and you get a clunker, at the junkyard and just watch it. And eventually it's going to turn into this souped up Ferrari or something. Ferraris may not be popular anymore. I can't fit in one anyway. So, how about your room? Kids, wouldn't it be nice if your room just naturally tended towards order? Okay? Wouldn't that be awesome? Wouldn't it be nice, dads, if your house's paint job got nicer over time? Right? You didn't have to spend thousands of dollars to get it repainted and so forth. And so we see this everywhere. You can't, if I thought about getting a t-shirt that says entropy fighter, because I feel like that's so much of my job in life is just fighting entropy, right? So much of our job involves that, including spiritual entropy. It's everywhere. So returning back to our wood burning example. When wood burns, all of the energy in the universe that was present before you burned it is still present after you burned it, according to the first law. But according to the second law, much of that heat now gets transformed into less usable forms of energy, like heat. And then when that heat dissipates, you're essentially left with this pile of ash, which is not nearly as usable, right? So that's how the second law would apply to that. And again, just like with the first law, the second law has never been broken. It doesn't have exceptions. Here's what one thermodynamics textbook said. To date, no experiment has been conducted that contradicts the second law, and this should be taken as sufficient proof of its validity. All right, there's no exceptions to these. Again, these are super laws. All right, if you're going to believe in laws of science at all, these are the two to believe in. There's been so many experiments to try to violate these. Now, what does all this mean now with regard to the origins question? What's the implication? Well, if the universe could not have always existed, and we still have usable energy. So according to the second law of thermodynamics, if the universe is infinite in age, then you shouldn't have any usable energy anymore. Everything should be totally broken down. We should be at a heat death state. And yet we have this abundant amount of usable energy in keeping with a young universe concept, which is what we would argue for. Notice that the biblical creation model is in harmony with the laws of thermodynamics. So for example, Psalm 102. So this is Hebrews chapter 1, quotes from Psalm 102, which was written 3,000 years ago, before we knew the second law of thermodynamics existed. And notice what this passage says. This is one of the evidences of Bible inspiration. You, Lord, in the beginning laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. Notice, they will all grow old like a garment. Like a cloak, you'll fold them up, and they will be changed. But you are the same. You're not subject to the second law of thermodynamics, and your years will not fail. All right, now, according to the laws of science, you want to be scientific. According to the first and second laws of thermodynamics, which have no exceptions, you can't have the spontaneous generation of matter happening, and matter can't be eternal. And those are the only two options if atheistic or naturalistic evolution are true. So the evolutionary model is impossible. That leaves some form of creation. That's the only other option. If it couldn't create itself and it didn't exist forever, then it had to be created. And on top of that, the biblical creation model is actually supports both of these laws. You can find both the first and second laws in the Bible. So if you stick with the actual evidence, and specifically the scientific evidence, rather than having a blind faith in what naturalistic scientists are shoving down our throats, then the evidence demands that there has to be a God. This is the cosmological argument. The universe is here, couldn't create itself. It requires an ultimate cause, an omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent being outside of the box, the confines of the universe, that opened the box and put it all in there. Another classical argument for the existence of God is what we call the teleological argument. This is especially of interest to engineering minds. Atheistic philosopher and professor Paul Ricci said, it's true that everything designed has a designer, right? Logically. You find something that's designed, it implies the existence of a designer. So if you can find evidence of universal design, then by implication there must be a universal designer. All right, now atheists like Ricci admit usually that basic truth. Now they just refuse to admit that there is design. But they concede if you actually could find design, it would prove there had to be a designer, because you can't have a poem without there being a poet. A painting requires a painter. A fingerprint requires I always get weird answers on that one. A finger. You need a finger, right? You see how it's implied. All right, so does the universe contain the characteristic of design? Now, you've got to be actually reasonable about this and open to considering what would something have to, what kind of attributes would it have to be designed? There's actually an infinite number of examples from nature that demand there has to be a mind behind it, because they show intention, purpose, planning. These are things that require a mind. And in fact, there's so many examples of design. Notice what Shermer said about it. The design inference comes naturally. The reason people think the designer created the world is because it looks designed. I guess we're done here. We perceive nature to be intelligently designed based on what? Our experience of human artifacts. In other words, our observations of the natural world. When we do science, we understand how design works. And so then when we look at things in nature and we see that they have those attributes, we logically think, well, that must be design too. That's logical. We know some human artifacts are intelligently designed because we've observed them being made and we have vast experience with human artificers. In other words, we're basing our thinking on actual evidence. This isn't blind faith. Remember this statement from Shermer. Since the most common reason people give for why they believe in God is the good design of the world, intelligent design creationists are tapping into the intuitive understanding most people hold about life and the universe. Notice again, this is intuitive that there's design. You have to try to explain it away to try to say it wasn't designed. But there's too many examples to deal with. I like to study thermal science. This is some of the work that I did in graduate school. So let's look at just a couple interesting examples. One of the amazing thermal science systems that God created is in the human body. It's the human biothermal system. This is the system that right now is overseeing your temperature and how your body responds to temperature fluctuations, changes in the environment and in your body, these kind of temperature. And the body is doing this through this extremely complex thermoregulatory system that all works interchangeably, extremely sophisticated. So let's look at just a couple details about this sophisticated system. I could do an entire session just on this. So the entire temperature system in your body is controlled by your brain. And the processing center in the brain that controls the biothermal system is the hypothalamus. And this is basically the thermostat for your body's air conditioning system. Okay? So it's controlling the thermoregulatory system. And the body has these temperature sensors like thermometers or thermocouples in engineering called thermoreceptors. And these are located throughout your body in strategic places. And they're reading the temperature wherever they are. Okay, now that's already, and I've got to step back and think, okay, does this sound like design or accident to you? Okay, let's try to be fair about this. They're in your hypothalamus, they're in your skin, they're in your bladder, they're even in your eyes. And the thermoreceptors that are in your skin are your peripheral nerves, and they're detecting changes in the external temperature, so the air temperature. And the thermoreceptors in your hypothalamus are detecting your blood temperature. And all this temperature information is going to the hypothalamus, and it starts adjusting your body's thermoregulatory functions using effector nerves. These are like power lines that are used to connect various parts of your body with the hypothalamus and initiate different kinds of response to temperature. Okay, now again, you're thinking through how in the world does that evolve? I mean, this is a pretty complex system that has to all be intact, right? Shows intention, planning, right? So let's look at just a couple examples of how this plays out. Okay, so the bladder's detrusor muscle. You may have not even heard of that term before. You've got thermoreceptors in your bladder that are taking the temperature of the liquid there, right? And it uses these power lines of communication, the effector nerves, and sends this information up to your brain. As the temperature in the bladder drops due to it getting cold, a bladder cooling reflex is triggered in the hypothalamus. Okay, now how in the world, what is the hypothalamus supposed to do with this information? I mean, how does it know what to do? Okay, it takes this information, it goes, oh, wait a minute, it's getting too cold down there. So it sends to the detrusor muscle a message that tells the detrusor muscle on the bladder to contract. And the detrusor contraction makes you feel the urge to go eliminate the cooler liquid from your body. Why? To help keep your body's core temperature regulated. Okay, now how in the world did that just accidentally happen one day? Okay, now that's silliness. I mean, you can believe that if you want, but you just need to understand that's superstitious mumbo jumbo to think that. It makes much more sense that there's an engineer behind this that did this. How could someone even come up with a system like this? The muscle, the sensors, the nerves connecting the bladder all the way to the hypothalamus, this had to already be planned out and intact and working from the beginning. Think about it. How effective would an effector nerve be that went from the hypothalamus and it's only halfway down to the bladder? Sorry, not quite all the way to the bladder yet. I mean, how helpful is that going to be? And if that does happen, why do we not have a ton of different effector nerves that don't quite get to the various organs and so forth? Doesn't even make any sense. This shows decisive design, planning, intention. There's no way around it. The natural order demands there has to be a designer behind it. And I'm not alone in coming to that conclusion. There's an area of engineering that is growing by leaps and bounds over the last couple decades called biomimicry and bio-inspired engineering. So biomimicry is where engineers use nature as a blueprint and try to just copy it. The webpage for George Washington University's Center for Biomimetics and Bio-Inspired Engineering says, however, despite our seeming prowess in these component technologies, we might seem like we're pretty sophisticated in things we've designed. We find it hard to outperform nature in this arena. Nature's solutions are smarter, more energy efficient, agile, adaptable, fault tolerant, environmentally friendly, and multifunctional. Thus, there's much that we as engineers can learn from nature as we develop the next generation machines and technologies. All right, does that sound like accidents, a bunch of accidents to you? Nature is well engineered, so much so that the top engineering minds are looking to it for their designs. Now, again, these engineers are not going to be considered friendly to creationist thinking, but this kind of mindset is becoming widespread in the engineering community. Engineers can't help but stand at awe of the design that we're seeing in nature. So here's just one example. Engineers are more and more coming to the realization that insects function amazingly well when you consider the fact that they carry less than 0.01% as many neurons in their little brains as do humans. And yet their ability to maneuver, if you watch closely these little flying insects, we can't do that in engineering. We can't do what the insects can do. And one of the insect features that engineers discovered a few years ago is that a bunch of these flying insects, for example, are equipped with this sophisticated engineering sensor. By the way, if you got an engineering sensor, there must be an engineer behind it, right? That's logical. And yet they're loaded with these little engineering sensors, okay? And one of the sensors that they have helps to keep track of their orientation and stay upright when they're flying in the air. Ocelli are these small eyes located on the heads of various kinds of insects that are in addition to those bigger, larger compound eyes we usually think of as their vision eyes. And we don't notice these other tiny little eyes they have. And engineers have come to believe that these ocelli are horizon sensors. They locate the horizon to help the insect know which way is up and down while they're flying. Now, again, you think that just happened? I mean, logically, you want to say that just accidentally happened one day? So with these ocelli in mind, engineers started trying to mimic these in our own aerial vehicles. So engineers from Caltech and Australian National University in association with NASA designed a biomorphic ocellus mimicking the ocelli of dragonflies in order to try to achieve an improved flight stabilization system for aerial vehicles. So when engineers engage in this kind of design, they are unconsciously, I'm sure in many cases, but tacitly acknowledging that the natural realm has way superior design than they can design. Okay? Therefore, there is a designer. This is not rocket science. Okay? This isn't complicated. Unless you don't want God. That's the issue. The world doesn't want God. Why does the world not want God? It doesn't have to do with the evidence. This whole debate never has to do with the actual evidence. This has to do with the fact that we want to do what we want to do. And so we got to eliminate God so we can do it. The world around us is good at that. Satan's good at giving you little arguments that'll help you to do that. But if you just follow the evidence, it's without excuse. It's the fool says in his heart, there's no God. You're a fool. It's God saying that. Psalm 14:1. God actually calls you a fool. And that's not like an insult. He's saying there's so much evidence that you're just totally unwilling to it'd be like a person saying, look, there's a male and there's a female. And you're like, I don't accept it. The fool does that kind of a thing. The evidence is clear on this. There's many other kind of powerful evidences of design we could look at. This gives you a little taste of the evidence. There's a lot of people on the planet. What, 8 billion now? that believe in all kinds of false ideas. You got 2.3 billion or so that are Christian in their thinking. Half of those are Catholic, half Protestant, and hardly any of those are members of the church. You got Islam, nearly 2 billion. Hinduism on the rise, 1.2 billion that are unaffiliated. This would be your irreligious people, your atheists and so forth. And yet God tells us in 1 Peter 3:15, we're supposed to be ready to be able to give a defense. Christians are supposed to be apologists. Somebody contacted us at AP and said, I like what y'all do, but I don't appreciate your name. You guys don't have anything to apologize for. And they're not understanding what the word apologetics means. It comes from the Greek word apologia, which is what underlies this concept here. Give a defense. Christians are supposed to be apologists. We're supposed to be ready to do that. For all these different kinds of ideas that are out there, it's up to us to actually present the truth to them. Ezekiel 3:18 and 19 contains this eerie warning to God's people. He says, when I say to the wicked, you shall surely die, and you, his followers, give him no warning, nor speak to warn the wicked from his wicked way to save his life. Okay, that same wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood I'll require at your hand. Yet if you warn the wicked, and he does not turn from his wickedness, nor from his wicked way, he shall die in his iniquity, but you have delivered your soul. This is a serious responsibility. And I'm thankful that AP has been around for, over 4 decades now. And the purpose of this organization that I work for is, people don't have time to do all the research to respond to every crazy thing that is out there. And some of these things require a lot of digging and study. So the point of this organization is to try to develop materials for you. We're doing the study for you, packaging it in a way where you can not only learn about these things, but prepare you to be able to talk to other people about it. And so that's what we're doing at Apologetics Press. If you're unaware of what we're doing, and hopefully this, as we go throughout this weekend, I'll be able to tell you a little bit more about our work if you don't know anything about that, and specifically the kind of tools that you might like to have in your library, for example, to help prepare you to defend the truth. All right. We're done with this session, so we're going to take how much of a break do we want to take? How much of a break? When are we supposed to start the next session? 7:30. Okay. How about we do 15 minutes is fine with that. Let's do a 15-minute break. All right. Thank you for your attention.